Oscar Piastri has just dropped a bombshell on McLaren after what can only be described as a disastrous weekend at the United States Grand Prix, and it's sent shockwaves through the entire Formula One paddock. The young Australian, who has carried himself with calm confidence all season, finally cracked the mask after a weekend where nothing went right. McLaren came into Austin expecting to defend their lead and silence Red Bull's growing threat, but instead, the team left Texas with more questions than answers. From the first lap of the sprint to the final corner of the race, everything that could go wrong did. And Piastri's post-race comments have left no doubt that the tension inside Woking is reaching a breaking point. His words weren't the usual polite driver talk. They were sharp, defiant, and above all, revealing. It all began on Saturday when disaster struck early in the sprint. Piastri and Norris, two teammates turned rivals, made contact in a clumsy, heart-stopping moment that sent shockwaves through the McLaren garage. The incident wasn't catastrophic in terms of damage, but the symbolism was impossible to ignore. Two cars fighting for the same championship, two drivers refusing to yield, and a team suddenly realizing they might be losing control of their own success story. The pit wall went silent. Engineers exchanged uneasy glances. What should have been a small racing moment instantly became the spark of something much bigger. The pressure of leading the championship was starting to show, and for the first time, cracks appeared in McLaren's united front. By the time Sunday arrived, the situation had gone from bad to worse. Piastri qualified only sixth, a full 2 rows behind Norris. And from the first lap, he was fighting a car that simply wouldn't behave. The MCL 39, which had looked like a masterpiece earlier in the year, felt unpredictable and unbalanced in the brutal Texan heat. Tires overheated, the rear slid constantly, and the team's carefully planned strategy began to crumble. Norris stormed off in pursuit of Verstappen, but Piastri could do little more than defend his position against the Mercedes of George Russell. The radio messages told the story of a driver losing confidence with every lap searching for grip that never came. When the checkered flag finally waved, Piastri's 5th place felt less like damage limitation and more like a defeat one that hit McLaren hard. And then came the bombshell, facing the media, with Verstappen closing fast in the standings and Norris cutting the gap to just 14 points. Piastri delivered a statement no one expected. His tone was firm, almost defiant, as he dismissed concerns about Verstappen's charge and shot down suggestions that McLaren should stop favoring one driver. It wasn't just what he said it was, how he said it. Calm, confident, and with the edge of someone who's had enough of playing it safe. Inside McLaren, those words have landed heavily, sparking debate about whether the team's balance between its two young stars can hold. The bombshell Piastri dropped wasn't about numbers or results. It was about control, confidence, and pride. If you think that's explosive, you haven't heard the full story yet. Because what Piastri said after Austin reveals far more than frustration, it exposes the growing pressure inside McLaren as Verstappen and Red Bull close in. Piastri's calm yet cutting words carried the weight of a driver who's seen his once comfortable lead slip away and now feels the storm closing in. The young Australian didn't just admit the weekend was poor. He laid bare the frustration, the confusion, and the growing tension that has gripped McLaren since Verstappen reignited his title charge. His honesty, after Austin revealed more than disappointment, it revealed a team standing on the edge of a psychological battle it didn't expect to fight. Everything about the weekend unraveled from the start. McLaren arrived in Texas confident, armed with data and upgrades they believed would match Verstappen's relentless form. But almost immediately, things went wrong. The sprint incident with Norris on Saturday set the tone, and by Sunday, Piastri was wrestling a car that simply refused to cooperate. The MCL 39 was twitchy through the slower corners and unpredictable, underbreaking a complete contrast to the stable planted machine that had delivered him podiums earlier in the year. Asked what went wrong, Piastri's tone was flat. It just didn't come together. The pace wasn't there. Simple words, but in Formula One, that's code for something much more worrying. For a driver as composed as Piastri, the cracks were visible. His radio messages grew increasingly clipped, the frustration in his voice saying more than any interview could. Every time he tried to push, the car bit back overheating tires, unpredictable rear-end slides, and no sense of rhythm. He described it as difficult to get into a flow. The remaining calendar will determine whether Norris can complete his comeback against Piastri. Next weekend is the Mexican Grand Prix, where both McLaren drivers will need strong performances to hold off Verstappen. After Mexico comes Brazil with a sprint race, then Qatar before the season concludes in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. Norris needs to outscore Piastri by just 14 points across these 5 races to take the championship lead, and based on recent form, that's entirely achievable. The irony of this situation is that McLaren's internal battle is helping Verstappen more than either of their own drivers. While Norris and Piastri are crashing into each other and fighting for position, Verstappen is winning races and closing the gap to both. Verstappen is now just 40 points behind Piastri and 26 behind Norris. If the two McLaren drivers continue taking points off each other, Verstappen will overtake both and win his 5th consecutive championship. After Mexico comes Brazil with a sprint race, then Qatar before the season concludes in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. Norris needs to outscore Piastri by just 14 points across these 5 races to take the championship lead, and based on recent form, that's entirely achievable. The irony